So this is a gauge swatch, and all it is a small swatch with a set number of stitches that I've knit for a certain number of rows that will tell me how many stitches per inch and rows per inch I have. So all you do is knit a small swatch, that means knit on one side, purl on the other, for most patterns, and the patterns will tell you, like ours does, that the gauge was done for a stockinette swatch. This is a stockinette swatch. It means you have knit on the right side and purled on the wrong side so that you have the smooth V's for the knit stitch on one side and the bumpy purls on the back side. So this is a little stockinette swatch that I made for another project, but I cast on, I knit a certain number of stitches, I did a certain number of rows, I cast off, and then I washed this so that I would see how the gauge changed from unwashed to washed or blocked. And the reason that I did this is because many yarns will actually bloom, and you'll find that the tight knitting that you had earlier is not as tight as you thought it was going to be. It's important to do a gauge swatch and to block it so that you know your gauge for your project. Every knitter has different gauge for every project. And sometimes as you become a more experienced knitter, you may find that your gauge or your tension will change from projects that you did at the beginning of your knitting career to the present knitting career. So here's our swatch. To measure our swatch, we are just going to take our tape measure. That's why we keep it in our bag. And we are going to set it from one side to the other. And there were 20 stitches in this swatch. And you can see that it measures about 3 1/4 inches across. Okay. Now, another way that you can do that is you can actually take your tape measure and set it at the beginning of a stitch and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe a little bit of this stitch. So it might be a 5 1/4 stitches per inch. But you can also take that 3 1/4 inch measurement and divide it by 20 stitches to get your stitches per inch. Now the other thing we're going to do is measure our rows, and we're going to do a similar thing. You know how many rows you've knit. So you can see I have 1 3/4 inches. So you'll actually divide that by the number of rows that you have knit, and that will give you your rows per inch. You can also take your tape measure and find the top of a stitch. And here's the top of our stitch, and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it looks like about a half. So it's probably about 6 1/2 rows per inch. So that is how we determine our gauge. And all you have to do now is go compare your gauge, which is 5 1/4 stitches and 6 1/2 rows, and see if it matches the gauge from your pattern. Now don't despair if it doesn't. Most knitters have trouble matching their gauge to their pattern. You may need to increase your needle size. That will give you fewer stitches per inch, or decrease your needle size, which would give you more stitches per inch.